From the Foundation Studio right here in the Mississippi Delta today, a place up here in the Mississippi Delta called Delta Bluffs. Welcome to SuperTalk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the incredible world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful SuperTalk Mississippi Radio Network. But if you're listening on SuperTalk TV at C Spire TV, we appreciate you being there. But there are also people who are listening or watching on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast. It's January the 17th, 2022. It's amazing. January is zooming by. Hunting season, at least deer and duck hunting seasons, quickly coming to a close. We've got a couple of other weekends and looking forward to those. As I mentioned, I'm at my place up in the Mississippi Delta, finishing up a long weekend of deer and duck hunting. It's been just a beautiful weekend. Woke up yesterday to snow falling. And I had to tell you, one of the aftermath was a muddy mess, absolute muddy mess. It sure was pretty. I was actually back at the camp watching my grandson Brody, so his dad and his dad's dad could do some hunting. Brody and I went outside and we built a snowman. We threw some snowballs at each other. And as I said, everybody who hunts together and everyone across Mississippi understands this story. But we had a group text. People were texting, what they were experiencing out in the field. Some were hunting up in the hills. Some were hunting in the Delta. The ones up in the hills, though, man, it was absolutely beautiful. Had some nice accumulation up there. Had some down here too, but it quickly went away. My friend Jake Carter was hunting at a place up in the hills we call Mount Everest, because it's the highest point. You can actually see the city of Greenwood 7 miles away. The pictures that he was sending from Mount Everest actually sort of looked like Mount Everest there for a bit of time. And so while it was pretty, it didn't take Jake long to send a text out to say something like, "I'm freezing to death, I'm coming down," because it was pretty windy. It snowed most of the morning, so that was pretty interesting. Also, the duck hunters had some incredible pictures they were taking. I mean, to duck hunt and to deer hunt in the snow, that's so cool. I went over to our property over in Shula with my nephew Ryan, and we almost got stuck. I mean, the truck was sideways more than it was straight, is what I'm trying to say. And while we were there, I actually mentioned to Ryan that the only person that I would trust going through this mud is my friend Mark Creech, who I've talked about before. But literally no more than I just got that out of my mouth, that the phone rings, and what we learned from the phone call is that Mark had slid into a ditch over at our Menor City farm and was stuck in the mud and needed help. So maybe it was a bad omen that I mentioned his name about being the guy who could most likely get through the mud. But he was stuck real bad. But that was the story of the aftermath. It was just really, really slick out there. There's something really special about the quality of Delta gumbo mud. And for those who have been in it before, you understand what I'm talking about. And Steve Azar, who wrote One Mississippi, the theme song to SuperTalk Outdoors, I'm going to suggest to Steve that he write a song about Delta gumbo. And I can also tell you there's a lot of stories about being stuck in the Delta gumbo. Certainly there are a lot of broken axles that he could write about. So I think that would be a really good one. We saw a lot of deer over the weekend, but not any shooters. We ate really good. We ate some great duck jambalaya. My buddy Jake, his dad has this recipe. His dad Rick has this recipe for a cabbage and pork concoction. And it was really good. We had, the obligatory deer steaks, of course, and we had some BB's sausage. Their smoked sausage is terrific. We laughed a lot, made a lot of memories, and needless to say, I love spending time at the hunting camp with my grandson Brody. But that sounds familiar, isn't it? I mean, that's what I'm telling you guys across the state is really the life of the deer camp these days. So many great memories made this time of year. And, the hunting is kind of the lagniappe. It's the experience and the memories made that really make this experience so truly amazing. By the way, as we've talked about, the 2022 legislative session is in full swing, and we're going to be watching the legislature very closely regarding any bills that have to do with the outdoors. We're not typically going to get involved in legislative stuff, as I say every week, but when it matters to outdoorsmen and outdoors women, we're going to let you know what those bills are. One bill that we're going to be watching closely is the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. A passage of that bill is going to be really important. It's going to be reintroduced this year. I think it's going to have a generational impact to our outdoor enjoyment. So we're going to watch that really close. So I think, frankly, in the next few weeks, we'll be talking a lot more about that as we go forward. In the first half of the show today, we're going to be talking about hog infestation and especially hog trapping that will take place after the deer season. And in the second half of the show, we're going to be joined back by William McKinley. He's been on the show before. He's really a terrific whitetail deer expert for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. I look forward to catching up with him about what's the latest on the deer season, what's the latest on CWD. So with all that said, let's move over to my friend Anthony Ballard, who is the Nuisance Species Program Manager or Biologist for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Hello, how you doing, Anthony?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
It's good to see you, man. Hey, look, one of the things that I always like to ask my guests is, where did your love of the outdoors come from?
So probably the most early memories I have is actually on the coast of Alabama. My grandparents owned a condo down there years and years ago, and so growing up, fishing down there and kind of understanding how that kind of the outdoors, works, I guess. Catching redfish and speckled trout, and then back home, my dad actually started the first hunting we did was squirrel hunting, and so that small game, that's kind of like the the foundation. A lot of times, you take kids and kind of introduce them to the outdoors, and then was eventually taking deer hunting, and all that just kind of grew and built as I got older and was able to do more things in the outdoors and that kind of thing. So that was kind of the roots of it, but it's spread far and wide since then. So
yeah, it's so interesting. My grandparents lived in Pensacola, and I remember we spent a lot of time during the summertime over there with them. I actually lived in Pensacola when I was very young, and then my dad was a traveling salesman, and eventually we landed in Gulfport, Mississippi. But my grandparents owned a beauty salon over in Pensacola. So I remember, my parents used to let me go to the Pensacola Pier when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I look back on it now and I'm thinking, wow, no parent would let any kid do that these days. But I would stay there all day long, and I learned a lot from the old wise fishermen that fished on that pier. I learned a lot about fishing. A lot of those techniques, actually, I still use offshore today. And as you pointed out, I think squirrel hunting, I think a lot of people who grew up hunting, that their very earliest memories are probably something to do with squirrel hunting with their father or grandfather, someone, some relative. I remember that really well myself, with that 16 gauge Winchester. What a great memory that was. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I hear that from everybody. I mean, that generational connection, and it gets in your blood. It's hard to get it out, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it just seems to get bigger and more expensive as time goes on.
Boy, that is for sure. It pays to have a good wife. In my case, my wife Ann really, really appreciates it, because I've got 3 kids, and it's the water. Spending time on the water together has always been important in our families, and now we have grandkids, and we're they're spending time with my grandson Brody. I mentioned him at the opening of the show, but when I mentioned to him that we were going home today, he said, "Oh, Papa, I don't. Let's stay." I said, "I get it, son. I get it." Of course, he's got school tomorrow, but it's really special. And one other question before we talk about, I was amazed at the number that the USDA study determined was the amount of damage done by hogs every year, $1.5 billion. And that study was done in 2010. So in today's numbers, certainly probably much greater than that. But we'll talk about that coming up here in just a second. But how did you decide to be a biologist?
Well, it actually worked out really well. I did my undergrad at Mississippi State University in wildlife, fisheries, aquaculture, bachelor's there, and then went on to go to Louisiana at Monroe for my master's. My master's project is, people that have gone to that field, you kind of have some, choosing of what kind of project that you're in, but not necessarily. Sometimes you just have to take what's open and go that direction. But fortunately for me, it was a wild hog project down in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, looking at damage in the marsh, and which I wasn't I kind of became more and more interested in that topic through that, and then through my summer work for Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries. I worked down there with the wildlife veterinarian, so I had some experience there with wild hogs as well. So all that together sort of built into the position that was becoming available here in our state.
We'll pick it up from right there. This is Anthony Ballard. He's the Nuisance Species Program Biologist for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And when we come back, we'll continue the conversation and really get into the hog nuisance issue that we have in the state of Mississippi. We'll be back after this.
Outdoors. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. We have Anthony Ballard with us today. He's a nuisance expert, nuisance species program biologist for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And when we went to break, you actually, it's interesting during your graduate program, you really were able to gain a lot of experience with doing the managing of the hog issue, particularly. I mean, I know that it's a significant issue in Louisiana as well. And you saw that they had an opening at the department, and that was your specialty, and it just worked out for you, huh?
Yeah, so that position, this is actually the first of its kind here in Mississippi. It actually kind of broke off a position held, who's one of our employees still, Ricky Flint. He was over the alligator, nuisance species, and fur bearers in Mississippi. So as wild hog issues became more and more, there was more and more attention that would be needed, more and more time and effort that needed to be devoted to wild hog management. It kind of became apparent that needed to be its own full-time position, and that's about the time that I was coming out of school. I had the position and the knowledge already sort of necessary for it, so it came in and kind of it married nicely together. The position that I had, that I was qualified for, and then the one that came available about the time I was coming out of school. So it really worked out perfectly.
That is awesome. So before we get in specifically the wild hog issue, in terms of nuisance animals, what other animals do you focus on?
So again, most of it's wild hogs, because that's the biggest issues on our private and public lands by far. But all the nuisance species as a whole in Mississippi are classified as red and gray fox, nutria, beaver, wild hog, and coyote. I think. So I do some permitting and some other things with those, but like I said, most of my effort goes toward some realm of wild hog management.
We've been lucky here at our three farms up in the Delta. We've gotten a couple of pictures of wild hogs from time to time, but they were just passing through, do a little bit of damage, and then move on. So we've been lucky there. We've given up on trying to fight beavers. The beavers have won. It just every time we tear it down, they build out bigger and better, man. Industrial grade dams. It's quite amazing. But you hear that a lot, don't you?
Yes, and it is truly amazing the engineering they put towards those things. It really makes you wonder how they do that.
It really is. I mean, big back, track hose can barely pull them out. It's just pretty amazing. So, as I mentioned that study, I was amazed at that was back in 2010. I don't know what your numbers are these days, but $1.5 billion of damage done by hogs. That is significant.
Well, and that's, so like you said, that study is somewhat outdated. And you also, when you do economic studies, especially on a large scale like that, you have to make a lot of assumptions. Yeah. And so, and then, even more than that, those are things that you can just quantify in dollars and cents, things like crops. Okay. You can quantify the number of crops that you've lost in a season. Things like economic damage, species diversity, endangered species, competition with native wildlife species, all that stuff, you can't really put dollars and cents toward it. So you look at that and you say, wow, that's a big number. But the estimates now, like I said, between things that you can't really quantify with dollars and cents and the things some of the estimations and assumptions that you had to make to get to that number, it's probably, most estimates now are vastly surpassed that.
Wow, I can only imagine. I can literally see that. So trapping is one of the big ways to sort of fight these things, isn't it?
It is. So we do trapping starting right after deer season on our WMAs that do have a hog population, and we continue all throughout the season, throughout the spring and summer, and then usually stop right there at the fall whenever bow season starts back. And that's really the big workhorse as far as management goes. It's the most effective way we have to manage hogs. And I guess one of the things that I would pass along to private landowners, people that have gotten discouraged, I get phone calls all the time. We tried trapping and it really just didn't work. And I go out on properties and see, rusty hog traps that hadn't been used in years. And it's more of a process. It's not an event. You can't just do it a few times and expect to get them under control. They're not going to stop reproducing. They're not going to stop being pigs. And you can't stop with your management, or else you lose all the ground that you've gained, and you really don't have anything to show for the effort that you did put in. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I would pass along to people listening is, if you're trapping, my recommendation would be to get the best information of how to go about doing that, and then just to not stop, because I see a lot of people get discouraged and just give up and say, oh well, and end up not really having anything to show for it in the end.
It is amazing. What's the these traps that you guys use? What's the most number of pigs that you've seen caught at one time?
You were talking about the Delta mud earlier. The biggest hog that I've since I've been here, I started in 2015. The biggest catch that I'm aware of was 28, and that was actually on my Hannah WMA. We had a trap out there that was set, and that wasn't even one of the big fancy smart traps. That was just a standard corral trap, and I think it was probably about knee deep in mud going in there to get all the pigs. Quite a but anyway, that was the biggest one that we've had so far, was 28.
Well, you think about the WMAs. I mean, we're lucky in the state of Mississippi to have a lot of public land. That has to be a pretty dramatic operation if you're talking about doing it on an ongoing basis. Kind of give me a sense of scale of those projects.
It's a big lift. So, I mean, and when you consider what all these WMA managers have to do just in daily operations, you have herbicides on the WMAs, you have trails that have to be maintained, you have to be, sometimes there's erosion control, there's, in the Delta, a lot of places, we've got moist soil impoundments. There's a lot of things that goes on, then you get toward the fall and you have to plant food plots. There's a lot of things that have to be maintained. People think of WMA as really one time a year during hunting season. But most of the heavy lifting actually goes on outside of that. Hunting season is when you get all the traffic in and you really can't do as much because you're trying to allow the public to enjoy that resource that we have. So a lot of the hog trapping, a lot of the sweating and breaking things and hard work gets done, during the summer and not during the hunting season.
Right, of course. I mean, I bet you get why you don't have that operation going on during the hunting season, the deer hunting season. I bet you get a lot of data points on just how serious this issue still may be, and just how effective your trapping programs have been, don't you?
Yeah, so we take a lot of data. We work with USDA. You mentioned them earlier, so we are actually able to be supplied by them to take disease samples. So we'll take blood samples, and we also take DNA samples. Those get sent off for analysis through USDA and through their labs. We also obviously get raw numbers on trapping numbers and that kind of thing. That kind of goes without saying. But there's a lot of information that we're able to gather. Reproductive numbers, we get that as well while we're trapping. And right now there's a few WMAs that we're working with to kind of establish a baseline and a survey method to actually gauge, where you started from, and then kind of create a trend line as you're trapping to really track your efforts, because that's one of the kind of the missing pieces in hog management is, if you've got a pile of dead hogs that you've trapped, that's great, but what does that mean? And so that's kind of what we're trying to tease out now and really establish a method to say, whether it's on a wildlife management area or whether it's on private land, to say, okay, here's where we started from, and then let's track that, once or twice a year throughout as time goes on to actually see your progress.
I bet you get a lot of calls from people just wanting to know more about your specialty. How often does your phone ring?
Pretty often. Yeah, I'm here in the Jackson office. I have a queue here in office phone, so I take those calls, and we also get web comments and that kind of thing. So really, it's kind of seasonal, and I think that's another unfortunate thing about hog management is people think of everything as seasonal. So in the wintertime, you have deer season and duck season, and then in the spring you have turkey, and in the summer you race fishing, and people kind of shift from one thing to the next. And that's one of the things that I try to really stress to people is, just because you're out deer hunting doesn't mean that there's not pigs that are out there being pigs, so that's one of the things that I try to stress to people is it's a year-round, constant effort, and not just something to cross off the list in June.
Tell people how they can reach you.
So you can go on the website. My office number is 601-432-2242. And then, so that's probably the best way. 2199, 432-2199 is our office here. Somebody put you in touch with me, and I'll be glad. I do private land visits and or phone conferences, whatever's needed.
Thank you very much, Anthony Ballard. We appreciate you spending time with us. When we come back, we're going to have another visit with our White-tailed Deer Program Coordinator from the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, William McKinley. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors, right here in the Foundation Studio up in the Mississippi Delta, cold Mississippi Delta. But we haven't had a lot of cold. We're going to be talking about that here in just a second. But I just want to thank my friends from the Foundation for Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, not to be confused with the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. As I said before, this is a group of men and women who are incredibly dedicated to the outdoors in Mississippi. They help the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks by raising money to do special capital projects, whatever they might be. And they also are very interested in programs that involve youth and so on. And they, from time to time, get locked on an issue. And when they do, they're pretty serious about it because they're an organization that is incredibly well connected. So their ability to bring other groups together around an issue is something that's extraordinarily impressive. So I'm proud to be here from the Foundation Studio and to be associated with such an amazing group of volunteers here in the state of Mississippi. So as I said, we're going to shift gears now and move over to my friend William McKinley. He's the White-tailed Deer Program Coordinator, and he's been on Super Talk Outdoors before. He knows what he's talking about. He's somebody I've been really looking forward to catching up with so I can share some of my experience here in the Mississippi Delta with him. But anyway, before we go any further, William, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Ricky. Thanks for having me today.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you. Hey, look, we're going to talk about the latest on chronic wasting disease because I'm curious about what you're discovering. And we'll come to that in just a second. But, you know, my experience this year, it's been another unusual season. And you and I have talked about this before. Every season has its own unique characteristics. And this particular season, we had a big acorn crop. We've had an incredible stretch of very warm weather. I mean, I'm talking about not just a little bit of warm weather, a lot of warm weather. And what we have seen in terms, we've actually had, we've gotten a couple of bucks, nearly 150 inches. So we've had a good season, so to speak, in terms of that. But our mature deer numbers are down. And what we see is a lot of nocturnal activity. And some deer that were kind of resident deer, we're not seeing them on camera like we used to. So they might have relocated or whatever. But it's been a really strange year. Is that what you're hearing from everybody?
You know, the reports are across the board, Ricky. Now, granted, the reports during between Christmas and New Year's when so many people were off and we were experiencing record highs, 5 people seeing one deer in an afternoon. And then for whatever reason, I went a few times during that. One of those afternoons, that Monday after Christmas, we saw a pile of deer, but they didn't see them again on that property for 5 more days. When I learned how to predict deer movement with accuracy, I'm going to leave the state, sell the secret, and buy that big chunk of land I'm wanting. But, we did have a big white oak acorn crop across much of the state. White oaks sprout early. They've already sprouted. Deer have started leaving those acorns alone. So that's your white oak and your swamp chestnut. So that movement was suppressed because there was so much high quality food in the woods. Then we had warm weather to contend with. When those acorns first started falling, deer movement was good in early November during the early primitive, some archery. But then, well, we always get that lockdown period around a week of the rut too. So all of those things put together have just kept bucks laid up quite a bit, especially your older deer. But I'll preface that with saying some of the best deer this state has ever seen have been harvested this year. So,
yeah, we had 2 records at our camp as well. What's interesting too, and we didn't talk about this, is there has been an incredible lack of rain for the most part. I mean, usually we've had tremendous rain, and you've got entire bottoms that used to be filled with water, for the most part are dry. And that's so the acorn crop in a lot of places where they might have gone underwater or certainly been wet and ruined, they've stayed dry and been available there for the deer to eat them. So that's another characteristic as well, isn't it?
And not only on the acorn front and the vegetation front, but how many hunters hunting in bottomlands hunt around water to funnel the deer around between sloughs to funnel their movements and take the water away? The deer he doesn't follow that same pattern. So it definitely has had an impact. We've had an odd year. And I say that, and we've talking about warm weather as I sit here in north central Mississippi looking out at a blanket of snow on the ground at my house. So hey, next week, if they can get off work, maybe call in sick for work. We got 6 straight nights here in North Central of nights in the 20s, highs in the 40s. We're going to see a lot of deer movement. Deer beginning to come to food sources. They're going to start hitting food plots next week.
We're going to finally see some of those big boys have to get out and walk around, because when it's warm, they just don't have to get on their feet, do they?
Well, they don't. And actually, when hunters see the rut, what we're seeing is that doe getting up, bucks harassing her, the chase. Well, they're wearing an insulated coat, and it was 80 degrees during the rut in central Mississippi. So you're just not going to see as much activity. They get too hot, so they stay bedded more during the day. And a lot of people think, well, the rut's not happening. Well, the breeding is happening. That doe comes into heat within a day plus or minus of the same time she did all her life. So she's still coming into estrus, and she's still going to get bred around the same time. There just may not be a lot of activity that hunters see in the woods around that time.
One of the benefits of doing this show is to have the opportunity to talk to the experts. And you think about the program that was done to track the bucks and really understand home range versus how many stay within a mile, how many go out as far as 5 miles, and some even further than that. It really is enlightening to know that, literally 2/3 of your bucks could be just coming in and out of there, could be as far away as 5 miles away.
That's right.
We had a target buck killed this weekend, but it wasn't killed by us. It was killed by our neighbor, but like more than a mile away. I guess that's just the way it is, isn't it?
It is. They move a lot, and they move so much more than what people give them credit for. Those radio collars, those GPS collars have shown us and taught us so much. Nearly every buck out there was taking an excursion during the rut. So I say that for those hunters that may have smaller acreage and they hadn't seen a good deer on camera. He's just out to show up at any time and may have come from 9 miles away. So
you just got to put, you got to, as we say, you got to have your butts in the seat.
That's it.
You can't win if you don't play. You definitely have to do that for sure. So we'll start the first part of the CWD conversation, and we'll finish it up in the final segment here in just a second. But are you seeing some alarming information coming out of the CWD discussion?
Yeah, we are, Ricky. Unfortunately, this disease is it's rearing its ugly head more and more. We've picked up a new county this year, Warren County. You know, the two positives we found in Warren are not very far from that index case in Issaquena way back in 2018. But with a 4-year gap, that tells us there were more positive deer in the meantime that gave it to these deer, because deer typically get it and die within a couple of years. So definitely it's still in the South Delta. The flood did not wash it away as so many of us had hoped, but it's still there. We're also seeing more positives with less samples this year in North Mississippi, but I will say part of that is our sampling methods have changed a little, that we're working with more taxidermists, so we're getting more bucks, and 75% of our positives are bucks. That's the nature of this disease. It tends to affect bucks at about 3 times the rate as does, 2 to 3 times. So where's the best place to get buck samples? That taxidermist. So I got to commend, we got 85 taxidermists across the state that are working with us. If a hunter wants to get his deer tested, that list of taxidermists is on our website. He can go there. But back to what we're finding, we're sampling the higher quality sample where we're more likely to find it, and we're finding it. We're finding more of it with less sampling.
Yeah, that you really don't want to hear that, but it's not a big surprise to you that that's the case, is it?
It's not. With our sampling at this point over much of the state, we have got a pretty good hold to where CWD is. Now, we'll preface by saying extreme South Mississippi, we hadn't got a lot of samples. We really need more, because we can't fight the disease unless we know where it is. So, but at this point, 38 positives across the state and in and around areas that we've already found the disease. So we will continue to find more around those areas.
We're talking to William McKinley. He's a white-tailed deer expert. He's the program manager for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. When we come back, in case you sort of, missed any of the conversation as it relates to CWD, we're going to remind you what it is. What is chronic wasting disease, and why should we be concerned about it? We'll see you after this break.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors from the Foundation Studio right here in the Mississippi Delta. I have my friend William McKinley. He's the White-tailed Deer Program Coordinator for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, and we're talking about CWD, chronic wasting disease. Unfortunately, we continue to see more cases. And let's do this, William. I want to kind of go back to the basics here. What is chronic wasting disease, and why should we be concerned about it?
Good question, Ricky. So CWD, chronic wasting disease, it's a transmissible disease, meaning it spreads deer to deer. It's a prion disease of the nervous system. Now, that means it gets in the nervous system and it continually affects the nervous system in that deer, and it is always fatal. So most deer are going to die within 16 to 18 months of getting the disease. So it shortens deer lifespans. We're seeing that in certain areas of the country where, not a lot of deer in areas where it's been for a few decades are living past 3 years old. That matters a lot in adult buck management. This disease will spread. We know it's spread through saliva, through feces, through urine, just deer-to-deer contact primarily, and through decaying carcasses. The prions that cause it are not alive. They're actually a misfolded protein. And once it comes into the body, usually they think through ingestion. A deer ends up eating after another deer at a feed site, hence the reason we ban feeding in the CWD zones. It gets it, these prions move through the body, get into the nervous system, and as they come into contact with normal proteins, they cause them to misfold. As those touch more, they cause more to misfold, and they end up forming these holes throughout the nervous system and brain. And when they form to a degree that they hit a part of the brain that controls life, the animal dies. Unfortunately, there is no cure, there is no vaccine. But the good thing in Mississippi, we got a pretty good hold to where this disease is, we think. We still need some samples from parts of the state to make sure. But when it's at a low prevalence, like 1%, which is most of our counties at 1 to 2%, we got a lot of options on being able to manage this disease.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. So you feel like the planning process as it relates to how we manage it and the data collection, you mentioned you had to get a few more samples, or you need to get a lot more samples from South Mississippi. Mm-hmm. All in all, you feel pretty good about sort of how the dots connecting in the state so we can assess the situation and know that the way that we're addressing it is the best it can be.
Well, we're relying on science from all over the country. We're working with a research project at Cornell University, at Michigan State University, working with our surrounding states in Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri. So we're relying heavily on some of the top CWD scientists in the world and looking toward the best methods. We recognize this state doesn't know state lines. It's moving, and it's moving slowly, which tends to lead people to not be as concerned about it because it moves so slowly. Unfortunately, when it gets there, you can't get rid of it. Yeah. So the best method is to keep it where it is now.
Yeah. So you said spreading. You mentioned that they actually found a sample in Alabama now.
They did. They had a public meeting this past week to announce that, and came out with a press release shortly before. But Lauderdale County, that's the northwest corner. So where it joins where it joins Mississippi and Tennessee, and it's exactly where they expected to find it. They had been increased sampling there. Just shows this disease has spread. It's from the epicenter. It's out about 100 miles from the epicenter already, which if you stretch from the Tennessee line 100 miles south, that's a lot of counties in Mississippi.
Yeah, that's not good. Hey, listen, old timers say to me, and I know you've gotten this question before, it's always been here, it's always going to be here, we shouldn't be concerned about it. What do you do when someone says that?
Well, I point to areas that were sampled for years and you didn't find it, and now we're sampling. Take Benton County, our hottest county. We sampled Benton County a lot back in the early 2000s. We didn't find a sample, didn't find a positive there, rather. Yeah. And now 1 in 7 deer in our samples in Benton County has come back positive this year. So 1 in 7, that's very, very high up there in that county.
Wow. So containing is really important. That's going to be for sure what this is all about. But at the end of the day, it's something we got to be concerned about. And I know you're going to continue to keep your finger on the pulse to the data that's coming out. Yes. And we'll stay in touch with you. We really appreciate your focus. The Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks is filled with experts across the board. We're so lucky to have this group of dedicated men and women working on our behalf. And Well, with that said, William McKinley, Whitetail Deer Program Coordinator, we really appreciate you spending time with us this morning.
Enjoyed being here and look forward to the next visit, Ricky.
Yeah. Okay. Have a great day, and we will see you next Monday. Have a great one. Stay safe. Stay safe. See you later.